I think that the earlier one can be diagnosed, I think that the better it really is for all concerned. Because what I find is that people who are not diagnosed, let's say as teenagers, they have already gone through so much ridicule, self-shaming, shaming from others. There's a lot of bashing that goes on from teachers and from administrators and such to children who just don't fit that mold. And I'm sorry, but about 2% of children fit that mold. But for ADHD in particular, I remember when we found out that you had ADHD that I was actually giddy, because I finally had an idea of why you behaved in certain circumstances the way you did.
Nobody likes to be challenged, or at least very few people do. And so, of course, going through that, especially when I was younger, wasn't necessarily something that I thought was valuable. It was more like I had an opponent I needed to beat. I've definitely learned that the key for my success is... Hi, and welcome to the Business Alchemy podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Mast. Well, I should say I'm your co-host, and with me is my co-host, Beth. And today we are going to have, well, something that I consider to be an interesting conversation, because we're going to talk about me. Well, we're going to talk about a lot of entrepreneurs, but something that definitely I embody, and that is ADHD or neurodivergence or whatever you want to call it, but I'm it. I'm the poster child, and Beth has worked with me for over, well, we've been married for 22 or 23 years coming up this year. So she's worked with me for a long time, and she's going to have some insights. I'm going to have some insights, and we're going to talk today. If you find yourself working with an entrepreneur, there's a reasonable probability that that entrepreneur may have ADHD as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what's it like to work with somebody that drives you crazy every day. Beth, you want to kick us off on that a little bit?
Well, certainly working with someone who is neurodiverse, and by the way, I love that word, but is a challenging at times position to be in. And it can be very frustrating to those of us who don't have that particular superpower to be able to relate to be able to understand, to be able to respond appropriately. It's really interesting how something like ADHD can affect one's way of thinking, one's way of talking, one's way of interacting, and definitely one's way of responding to situations. And the very first thing I would say to anyone is learn more about it. Whether you are ADHD or you're working with someone who's ADHD, learn more about it. And that will make a big change in your life for the better.
No question. I think, I know a lot of entrepreneurs actually haven't actually been diagnosed with ADD. I got diagnosed when I was 42 or 43. I don't remember now, but it was about 12 to 13 years ago. And it explained a lot when we did that. And for me, it was beneficial because I'd never really thought about it or talked about it. And when I understood that's how I was wired, it made it possible for me to embrace that. And probably more importantly than anything else, it made it possible for those that I worked with to understand why I had some weird tendencies that I did and why I did some of the stuff that I did. And while they still occasionally scratch their head, I think that understanding is key. So Beth, I really agree with you. I think just gaining an understanding of that is the first step in that process to hopefully making it a much more enjoyable work experience.
Mm-hmm. I also think, though, that you mentioned that you weren't diagnosed until you were, in your, I guess you were your early 40s. I think that the earlier one can be diagnosed, I think that the better it really is for all concerned. Because what I find is that people who are not diagnosed, let's say as teenagers, they have already gone through so much ridicule, self-shaming, shaming from others, that it really affects self-confidence. And if people who interact with others who do have ADHD just know that they have ADHD and understand that it's not a disease, it's a way of thinking and a way that one's brain is wired, I think that we can really build up children who have it so that they don't feel bad about themselves. Now, you were certainly teased. I'm not sure if it was, just about, your differences with the way you would think. But I think that if you had been diagnosed earlier, maybe you could have had some techniques taught to you that would have really helped you cope. And certainly others around you could have been taught how to respond to you in a way that would be, make things better for everyone, that would just be uplifting instead of dragging down. And I think that's really important to just acknowledge how many people are really shamed and teased and bullied by their parents, by their teachers, because they think in a way that's outside the norm.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I want to encourage you, if you know someone, or maybe you are someone, or you love someone that you think may have that, particularly if you think it may be you or somebody comes to you, don't be afraid and go, oh, I don't want to be diagnosed because that might mean something. No, it's really about knowing thyself. And when you know yourself, especially when it comes to business, you can then leverage that. Now, I'll be
Yes.
really honest. A lot of people with ADHD take drugs. I don't. Not because I'm opposed to them, but I didn't find I liked what it did. Now, I got diagnosed late in life, so I was in my 40s when that happened, and I tried them, and I remember, I think it was Adderall, I'm not 100% sure, but I tried them, and I remember actually sitting in a park with Beth, and she's like, what's going on? I'm like, it's really weird. There's nothing going on in my head. It's quiet. It was the first time in 43 years that my head had been quiet, and I didn't like it. Now,
Right.
if I'd been diagnosed younger, that may have been different. And again, I chose not to because I had just kind of gotten used to that, and I like that. But I want to encourage you again, especially if you think you may have ADD or ADHD or could be neurodivergent, uh, go ahead and get diagnosed, because that knowledge then allows you to lean into that. Because I'm a weird one. I actually think being ADHD is a superpower. And it's because there are some things that it allows me to do really well. There's a lot of
Hmm.
things it makes me stink at, but there's some that
Hmm.
I can do really well. And by understanding that, and Beth, you brought up something that I think is so important. I'd spent the first 40 some years of my life being told by people that, we'll just call it the system, could have been family, could have been teachers, whomever, that I was supposed to act in a particular way. And when I
Hmm.
didn't, and it wasn't because I was misbehaving, it was literally just because my brain fired differently. But when I wasn't doing that, that I needed to change. I needed to learn a better way. I needed to learn to manage my tasks. I needed to learn to manage my calendar. I needed to learn to get good at paperwork. Folks, I'm here to break it to you. I'm 56. I will never be good at those things. And that's
Hmm.
okay, because there are solutions apart from Jonathan becoming great at those. And I think, Beth, that as someone who works with someone with ADD, helping them understand and embrace the fact that we don't need to be an expert at everything. We need to lean into our God-given skills and talents and try to leverage them. Can you give some perspective on that as someone that is entrepreneurial but doesn't have ADD and has been working with me?
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, first of all, everybody's different. And, I think that the whole idea of being normal, so to speak, and doing things in a very certain way in the school system, especially, I mean, that's worth a whole podcast on its own, not just
Oh
one
yeah.
time, but a whole podcast, because everybody's unique. And our school system really stinks when it comes to being able to be flexible for everybody's uniqueness. It just doesn't do that well at all. And so I think that there's a lot of bashing that goes on from teachers and from administrators and such to children who just don't fit that mold. And I'm sorry, but about 2% of children fit that mold. The rest
Mm-hmm.
don't, and therefore end up having a really bad experience. A lot of those people are ADHD, but there can be a lot of other issues like autism or just dyslexia. I mean, there's a list of them. But for ADHD in particular, I remember when we found out that you had ADHD that I was actually giddy because I finally had an idea of why you behaved in certain circumstances the way you did. And that was very calming to me. I think for a lot of people, having a name to put something to be able to kind of put it in a box and put boundaries around it is actually very helpful. And although
Mm-hmm.
that's not really healthy in some situations. In this particular case, it was just very helpful for you and for me. What made you particularly unique, though, is that you had really built good systems throughout your
Hmm.
life to deal with this. And there's a lot of people out there who have ADHD who haven't built good systems and that they're still flailing, they're still struggling. They have self-doubt because they really don't know why their thinking is a little different than other people. But specifically for you and me, being married and working together, it brought a set of unique challenges.
Hmm.
One in your personality played into that as well. But being ADHD, your attention to details is terrible. I mean, from my perspective,
Yes.
I'm someone who's very detail oriented. So the fact that you couldn't seem to remember something, or I had told you something, and then you'd come back and you'd say, "Well, I didn't know that." And I'd say, I told you that. Well, instead of saying, I don't remember that, which to me would have been a different statement, you'd say, well, I didn't know that. Well, you did know that because I told you that. And it would actually cause an argument between the two of us. Well, when I found out you're ADHD and you were just using verbiage that didn't sit well with me, I could then go, okay, he did know that, but he just didn't remember that. And therefore, I'm not going to get angry about this because he can't help it. And the same point, I think those of us who are more detail oriented don't really know how to respond to someone who has ADHD. And we just, because we can't think like you, right? Just like you can't think like me, I can't think like you. It's just a very different perception. So I really had to do a lot of research and find out a lot about ADHD. And what was great is there's a lot of books out there, and there's just more and more and more all the time because more people are being diagnosed, more people are understanding themselves, how their brain thinks, how it doesn't think. And it just makes it so much easier to survive in today's world because there's so many techniques and resources to support those who love someone with ADHD, who work with someone who has ADHD, and the person themselves. And I do think that ADHD in the end is a superpower and that we need to lift that up and support it and give people who have ADHD a chance to shine.
So, from a practical perspective, Beth, if our listeners find themselves working with someone that is embodying those ADD characteristics, what advice do you have for them on making the best of that situation and actually helping them leverage that other person's ADHD to make their jobs better as well? Any advice that you can give to people that may find themselves scratching their heads as you maybe have done with me in the past?
I definitely think, from my standpoint, it was important that I didn't get frustrated with the situation, that I accepted it for what it was, and to know that instead of expecting you to do something that you just weren't good at, that I needed to make sure that we could surround you with people who were good at what you weren't good at. And the
Mm.
wonderful thing about that is it really doesn't apply just to this situation, it applies to everyone. So,
Yeah.
knowing yourself and really knowing what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are in a business environment, especially if you're an entrepreneur who is the head of a company, and then being willing to accept that there's just some things that you're not good at, and it's okay to get someone else to be able to help you with those things. I think that is the number one key to being on the path of success.
So true, and I agree with you. And it doesn't, and in any position, I mean, God's made each of us with unique characteristics in that, and I think understanding those characteristics is super important. I know, and when we had our agency, and I know even currently in my company, we are big on personality tests. We want to understand the personalities of the people we're working with, not because it's ever a hindrance, but because understanding how people think, how they react is so helpful in making the best of that work relationship and in making
Mhm.
sure that not only do we get the most out of it, but also that our coworkers get the most out of it because we can communicate with them in a way that they then understand, and it just
Mhm.
creates so much effectiveness. I think it's critically important.
I think that for you and for having someone who has ADHD, I think it's really important not to expect that you're going to be able to change a person. You know, how many people I remember
So
hearing this,
true.
a lot of young marrieds, you know, the husband and wife get married, one of them thinks they're going to change the other person. You're not going to change the other person. Let me just put that to rest right now. That's not going to happen. But what you can do is you can support the other person. So you can lift up some of the weak areas by supporting that. You can, basically stay in your own lane. I think that's also another key
Yep.
thing to helping someone. I'm going to let you do what you're really good at, and you need to let me do what I'm really good at. And if you don't cross over into that other person's lane, it really stops and puts an end to, prevents arguments and disagreements and that type of thing. Because when we try to go in each other's lane, if I try to do what you do or think the way you think, it's just not going to happen. And so you're going to have to accept that I can't do that. Just like I have to accept that there's certain things that you can't do. And if you can be accepting of other people's what we consider shortcomings, I think that that really helps, and at the same time really support their strengths. And I think that does a world of good to people who have ADHD, to have someone in their life, and hopefully multiple people, who will actually encourage them, support them in their strengths, and help them find someone or some solutions to, again, lift up the things they can't do so well, and just make sure that that can be done in a different way or by someone else.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that that positive outlook on it is so important because we're bombarded with media and everywhere else. I don't no individual blame, but we're bombarded really everywhere with the fact that, we're supposed to act a certain way, we're supposed to think a certain way, we're supposed to do all this. One of the things I would love to encourage you, if you are an ADD entrepreneur, try to find some other communities of entrepreneurs, because one of the things that I know made a massive difference for me in understanding how to leverage my ADD was becoming a part of a large coaching group, when I realized that probably 2/3 of the people in that coaching group, who were all also entrepreneurs, either had ADHD or acted as though they did, one way or the other. And it allowed me to see that, okay, you know what, this can be a successful personality trait when you lean into your strengths. Just like if you're not ADHD, there are things that you're going to be good at and you can lean into those. But if you happen to find yourself being one of those people that has ADHD, I want to encourage yourself to not only accept it, but also to surround yourself in some environments, some other entrepreneurial environments in particular, where you're likely to find more people like that. Now, Beth, in my experience, I believe, and I'd love your perspective, we haven't talked about this a lot, I believe that you will find more people with ADHD in entrepreneurial circles than in non-entrepreneurial circles. Not that everybody that's an entrepreneur has ADD, because you're very entrepreneurial and you don't have any of those afflictions. But I do think that entrepreneurship draws people with ADHD into it, because we don't always work well for others or with others. And so it allows us to do that. What are your thoughts on the fact that entrepreneurial communities generally seem to have a higher percentage of neurodivergent people?
Well, I just have to point out, you said affliction, and I just don't think that ADHD is an affliction. But I'm sure there's a lot of
Fair
people
enough.
in my shoes who are married to someone with ADHD, and they're like, I am afflicted. I'm afflicted by your ADHD.
Probably,
So,
yes.
but I was amazed when we went out into some other groups with other agencies, how many people who are entrepreneurs, who are visionaries, seem to have ADHD. And of course, at the point that we stepped out, I had done a lot of research, a lot of studying of what some of those characteristics and those traits are. And so I felt that I could identify them fairly quickly. What's really interesting, though, is when you think about it, in your mind, Jonathan, you have just this steady flow of thoughts and ideas. And as an ADHD person, I think that you have used those ideas as launch points for businesses. And so it really makes sense that if you're someone who is constantly having all of these ideas, and of course you think they're all good, you
Yes,
go out
of
and you
course, they're
want
my
to
ideas.
implement them. Yeah, you want to implement them. You want to start, I want to start this company. I've got this idea. I'm going to start this company. Oh, wait, I got this idea. And that is a great thing because I don't think we'd have small businesses if we didn't have people with ADHD, just because they're always looking to solve a problem. They've got these ideas out there that they want to implement. So I think it really makes sense that a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of visionaries, they're visionaries because they have all of these ideas. They see a vision. They can think outside of the box, outside of what the norm is. And I think
Hmm.
that that is really critical. There's a downside to that, though, and in the fact that you can be someone who thinks about a lot of different great ideas to start a business, but you really need someone to vet them, to help you pick out which ones are really going to be more likely to work. And that's where you really need a partner, a cheerleader, someone who can help sort through that with you,
So true.
so that you can find those ideas that really seem like good ones and then try to implement them. And at the same time along that path, again, you need a partner or someone who can be a cheerleader or support to help you stay focused on those ideas, because it's really easy to be like sheep and wander away off on another course when, it'd be much more productive if you'd stay on the course that you're on. Have you experienced that it's helpful to have that mirror, that co partner to help you with that?
It's definitely helpful, though, although I'm sure as you can relate, I didn't always appreciate that earlier on in the process. Nobody likes to be challenged, or at least very few people do. And so, of course, going through that, especially when I was younger, wasn't necessarily something that I thought was valuable. It was more like I had an opponent I needed to beat than I had a partner that I needed to work with, if that difference makes sense. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, as I've learned more and I've matured more and I've got more experience, I've definitely learned that the key for my success is really twofold. One, it's embracing what I'm good at and leaning into that, but it's also understanding and embracing the things that I'm not good at, not for me to do, but to then surround myself with people that are good at those things. So I'm not good at paperwork. So should I be the one responsible for it? No, I should have somebody on my team that's going to help me do those things. I'm not good at other aspects and following up. I'm terrible at the finances. I understand them, but it's too much detail work for me. That means I shouldn't be the one responsible for doing invoicing and doing AP and doing AR and all that, because I'm not going to be any good at it. It would be better for me, even as a startup, to hire somebody to work a few hours a week to help me do that, so that I could spend my time doing other things, because otherwise I might spend an entire day a week doing it. That takes me out of my zone of genius and means I can't focus on, in my case, sales and marketing, which I tend to be really good at. Well, that's then bad
Mm-hmm.
for the business if we remove that. And it's an ebb and flow. But yes, to answer your question, I found it really beneficial if you can find someone that you can trust, that you know has got your best interests in heart, as you and I have done, to then have that person as a sounding board. And like you mentioned, staying in your lanes, but knowing that I've got that support is critical, because I know that some of my ideas are harebrained, and I know that sometimes you're not going to agree with me. But when you get that look in your eyes that, uh-oh, we've been here before, and everything else, I know that we've been through that, we've walked through that, and I now know that means, doesn't mean I can't proceed, but it means I need to reevaluate. And there are
Mm-hmm.
times that it's good for me to reevaluate, because if not, we'd have even more balls in the air that we were juggling than if I didn't do that. So there's a balance there. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important, if you're that ADHD entrepreneur, to embrace the fact that you need some of that balance in a good way. And it allows you to leverage again the skills and the experience and what I love to call that circle of genius that you do have.
I think that one important point that I want to add there is that ADHD does not have to define you. It's a
Correct.
facet of you, of the way you think, of the way you behave. But for those of you out there who are ADHD, do not take this as a death sentence. It's an aspect of who you are and how you work. It's just a name that's been put to the fact that you think differently. And that is okay. Don't let people who don't think like you put you down. What we need to do to support you is to give you successes. And I think that was so key with you, Jonathan, is to know a lot about your personality and the different ways you think, because you're not just ADHD. You're
No.
also dominant, in a good way. You're strong-willed. You're very responsible. You think very highly of being, having integrity, and you also want to move forward. I've never known someone who has as much initiative as you have. So you have a lot of these things going on that are really good things. And so I really wanted you to succeed. And so it worked out really well that God brought you and I together, because
It
I was
did.
able to support you and give you successes. At the same time, you needed me and you were able to give me successes, and I felt fulfilled because I was able to live out my purposes. So finding that really good mix and being supportive and giving you successes and saying that ADHD is a superpower, and there's downsides to that, but there's all of these upsides, and we can support those downsides and just make you feel like, hey, I'm a good person. I can do a lot of good things, and I'm going to use this in order to help me do that. At the same point, I think that there are some really significant pitfalls to ADHD if you're not supported, if you don't have someone to cheer you on, if you don't have someone to help you focus. And I think that you are the best one to address some of those. What do you think some of those downfalls are? What should people with ADHD be careful of?
Boy, it's a loaded question, and I think there's a lot of that. I think more than anything else, it's getting distracted. ADD, I mean, as you know, my brain is constantly firing with new ideas and constantly firing of ideas I've got in. I could come up with new business offerings literally 4 to 6 times a day, and in my mind, be ready to launch them by the end of the day. As an entrepreneur with ADD, that's not necessarily a good thing, because it means I'm going in 400 different directions. A simple analogy, a shotgun blast can be very valuable, but as it gets out too far, everything gets so spread, and those individual pellets inside that shotgun shell have far less value at, let's say, 100 yards out than what a rifle would, which is one bullet focused and heading in the right direction. Probably a bad analogy, but it's the first thing that came to mind. And I think
It works.
as an entrepreneur, I think it's so easy to see opportunity in all kinds of different spots. And then as an ADD entrepreneur, not only do we see that opportunity, but we want to act on that opportunity. We want to take advantage of that opportunity. You know me, I love to help others. I love to take action. I love to move forward. And as you said, and so I could literally have all kinds of business ideas and be executing on 27 of them at the same time. The problem in doing that is that I'm not going to execute well on any of them, because I can't if I'm executing on 27 of them. I need to be focused, and I need to surround myself with people that will help me keep focused, so that I can take that energy and those ideas and reinvest those, so to speak, into my business, my existing business, in ways to improve it, as opposed to always trying to think of new and different things that are totally unrelated. So
Mhm.
that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. I'd be curious, having been married to me as long as you haven't worked of, what do you see as some of the things that maybe I've overcome in the last 25 years that you think were really important, that have led to some of the success we've been able to experience?
Well, I think you have, when you were younger, I think that you were teased in a really big way. And
All the time.
you take that very personally. And I don't think that's necessarily an ADHD thing. I think that's a Jonathan Mast, you're like a big teddy bear. You just take that very personally and took that inside. One of the things that you really overcame over the many years more recently, especially since you found out that you were ADHD, is you were able to, through your successes, realize that you were not a bad person,
Mm-hmm.
realize that you could use this as a talent, as a superpower, by putting good words and supportive words behind what was happening and to be able to focus it, you really built up your self esteem. And I think that when you have good self esteem, it makes a world of difference in the product that comes out. You were then willing to say, it's okay that I can't do everything. It's okay that
Absolutely.
not all my ideas are good ideas. And give yourself some grace there and be able then to accept other people's guidance and how to stay on that focused path so you could be a rifle. And then when you'd get those successes, that would really encourage you. And so it'd be like you'd be hungry for another success, and you'd also be giving yourself more grace when maybe something wasn't as successful. And I think that that has really changed over the years, partially just because you're the type of personality that you really want to try. You always want to try to do better, be a better man, be a better entrepreneur. You always looked at improving yourself. And, I think that you've really overcome a lot of the burdens of ADHD because you forgive yourself when you don't do something perfectly, and you ignore naysayers and trolls and people out there who are all too willing to point at you and laugh at you or make fun of you or say bad things about you for whatever reason.
Good point. I think, one of the things I'd like to talk about, and this is something that came up after a recent conference I was at out in California, where an author that has written some great books on ADHD and all that was actually one of the speakers. But he shared something that was so incredibly obvious, but I'm not sure that we've talked about it as a society enough. And I think it's really a key to understanding what it's like to work with somebody with ADHD. And that's this concept of now and not now. And I'll share my thoughts on it, but I would love for you also to share your thoughts. If you work with somebody that has ADHD, it is almost assured that their brain has only two ways they filter things that they're going to do now and things that they're not going to do now. And if it's in the not now, it may never, ever make it to now unless it comes back up for a reason. I remember when I got diagnosed, I was diagnosed by Scott, a psychiatrist that we were working with. And he described that most people's brains were like flat shelves. And, we had stuff pile up and stuff would pile up on that shelf. But at some point, it got too much and it would overflow off the shelf. And I think we can all relate to that. We get overwhelmed. We get too much information. That can happen to any of us. But he used the analogy with me of my brain was more like a slant, meaning that the moment it hit that shelf, it was already starting to leave. And it was going to leave whether we wanted it to or not. It wasn't going to stick. And I know that author talked a lot about, again, now and not now. And to me, that was kind of one of those big duh moments, but it is so true. That's how my brain works. I'm either going to do it now or I'm not going to do it now. As someone who's both married to and worked with that, how do you intake that and how do you think that concept is helpful for people without ADHD to understand?
When you relayed that back to me, I'm like, wow, light bulb flashed on. That makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense because I could actually see how my interactions with you, how that would play out. So one thing that you're really big on doing is you use your calendar to basically schedule things so that they become now.
Yeah, because
The other
otherwise they
thing
go into not now and I'll never see them again. Exactly. Yeah.
Right, right. And that's the thing to remember too, because when it's not now, it's not like you've got a little separate pile over here on the side of not nows that you get back to. Like me, I've got a flat desk, and here's my now pile, and here's my not now pile. They're not going anywhere. I just move one to the other, and then later on, I go into my not now, and I bring it back, and I look at it. That's kind of how it goes. The problem is with that slanted desk, when it goes off in oblivion. I mean, that not now does not come back up unless
Hmm.
someone brings it back up to you. And when that happens, sometimes it can be really late in the game and becomes an urgent problem. And then you
Yes.
react to it in a negative way. So let me give a personal example to that. There was a Christmas years ago. We'd only been married maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I'm going to say. And you had not gone out to buy me a Christmas present. And part of that was poor experiences in the past with other significant people in your life about what you would buy them. And so you had a lot of trepidation about going out and buying a present. So it didn't happen. You put it off. It just stayed not now, not now, not now, not now. Even when I would then give you a suggestion of, oh, I'd like this for Christmas, or I would like this for Christmas, it didn't stay in your mind. It didn't come back around because there was nothing on your calendar that says, oh, now I got to make Christmas present buying a now. So we got to the day before Christmas, like a day or two before, and then suddenly you were panicked because you're like, oh, Christmas is coming up. I haven't gotten Beth anything. What is it you want? Well, of course, I want you to be all romantic and think about these things ahead of time because that means you care about me and have all these ideas about what you should buy me yourself. But of course, you avoid that because you have negative connotations from old relationships. And so it was just this huge cliff in front of you that you did not know how to overcome. And so you overcompensated. I had said, well, I'd like a bird feeder, and we'll get some bird seed to be in it. So you went to the store and you bought me a bird feeder. And you thought that I also liked candles. Well, what you then did is you bought like 6 bags of bird feed and you bought like 6 candles. And these were just chunk candles, nothing unique about them. And you wrapped all of them individually. So the first present I opened was the bird feeder. And I'm like, oh, cool, thank you, a bird feeder. I'm thinking, oh, this isn't very creative at all. I just told him to go get this. I should just go buy it myself. He didn't put any thought into it, and so he doesn't love me. And then the next one I open is a bag of birdseed. And I'm thinking, why would he gift me a bag of birdseed? And then the next one I opened was another bag of birdseed. And then the next one I opened was this plain old candle there was nothing unique about it. And then the next one I opened was a candle. And it was so weird. It was just like, this guy doesn't think anything of me. But I had and subsequently I actually made you cry. And that
You
was a
did.
heartbreaking experience for me. And I made you feel so bad, but I didn't understand how your brain worked. And that asking you to think of something that I would like was a difficult process. And without a time set aside for you to take yourself and our stepson at the time, because he was young, I hadn't had our son yet, to go to I didn't know I had to schedule that out for you or have a list prepared. I had to feed you some information in order for that to be successful and support you in that, because it just wasn't something you were capable of. But it never in a million years meant that you didn't love me. And that's what I didn't understand until you were diagnosed, and until I understood how your brain was working. And so those are the type of communication issues that you can have in a marriage and in a work environment that can really be hurtful to both parties when it's just a matter of you're thinking about the same thing in completely different ways.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that's probably if the listeners get anything as a takeaway, ask yourself. I remember Scott sharing this with us when he said, "Do you think that Beth has negative intentions?" And I'm like, "Well, no, not at all." And he asked you, "Do you think Jonathan has negative intentions about whatever situation?" And no, you need to accept that the people around you are generally good people and they generally don't have negative intentions for you. And when that happens, and it will happen if you have ADD, you're going to go, where did that come from? I don't understand. communicate through that, ask questions and work through that to
Hmm.
help understand where each person's coming from, because it takes time, and it's, Beth and I have proven it time and time again. We still do it. We're much better at it now, but we can still have if we have it scheduled to go to the market, we will leave a different way out of our neighborhood. We will drive there a different way. We will park in a different spot. We'll still get there, but we'll do it differently. And
Totally different ways.
one just a simple suggestion or a simple thing, but that can happen in the work environment as well, where you may look at your coworker and go, why in the world did you do it that way? Don't worry if it got it done. That was, I know, a big thing I had to learn. It didn't have to be done my way. We just needed to get to the outcome that I wanted to get to. And as an
Hmm.
entrepreneur with ADD, understanding that, I think, was one of the major things that helped me become more successful, was accepting that I could show my way, but my way wasn't the only way to do that. And it really didn't matter in most cases, as long as the objective was achieved, if that makes sense.
And vice versa. I mean, there's having ADHD is one certain neurodivergent way. There are lots of different ways. I've got my own ways of thinking about it. Nothing, it doesn't mean that you're the one who's divergent. Maybe I'm the one who's divergent. I just
Sure.
think that we're so key on saying, okay, this was where we started from, and this is the picture, and any picture that looks different than this is wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's happened in our society over years, is there were these ways that were discovered, the way we think, the way we act, and that certain ways were considered normal, and that any other way is considered abnormal. And unfortunately, the people who look like that act like everybody else is wrong. And I think that that's kind of how our school system has been built. It's been
Yeah.
built on this picture, the original picture. This is how it should look. And it's never been updated. In business, it's kind of the same way. We have this idea that it should look this way. And if it doesn't, it's wrong. And it's just, we got to have grace for each other and try to learn from each other and for each other so that we can support them. And business is a huge, huge area, whether you're married to the person or not married to the person. If you are working for someone who has ADHD, you should find out as much as you can about that, and you should choose to be as supportive as you can and communicate with them. And you're going to have to schedule time to communicate about it, because they're not going to just remember to do that, and that's okay.
Well, and as somebody with ADD, it's not that we're not remembering because we don't care. It's remembering. It's We're not remembering because, candidly, we're just not capable. It's not how our brain
Hmm.
works.
Hmm.
And that's, I wish it wasn't true, but that's just the way it is in some cases. So no, it's so true. Well, as we bring the
Absolutely.
plane in for a landing, Beth, what's one piece of advice that you would give to anyone working with an ADD entrepreneur, if you had to summarize it and leave them with one tactile bit?
It's so hard to say just one, but I think the first step is to determine if that's something you want to do. So if you're
Mm,
working with someone with ADHD, do you want to learn more about that and learn how to interact with them and be positive about that situation? Because if the answer is no, then you should leave and go work somewhere else. It's
yeah.
not fair to the person who has ADHD, and it's not fair to you. But if it's something that you would like to do and you're willing to look at it in a very positive manner and be supportive and help that person, I think you'll find that they're very grateful when they start to succeed, and they will reciprocate in that. And it can be a very rewarding situation to be in, because they'll lean on your strengths and you'll lean on theirs. So decide, is that something you want to do or not? And if it's not, that's okay, but then you should leave.
I think that's really good advice. Yeah, go in with your eyes wide open. It's not a bad experience, but it is definitely one worth making that decision up front, or both parties are going to be frustrated in that. And I want to encourage you, if you are an ADD entrepreneur, especially when you're hiring, let the people that you're hiring, especially if they're going to be working with you, let them know. Be candid about that and let them know that what that's involved, because it is a different experience. It's not a bad experience, but it's different. And letting them know will make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that have those characteristics that you need, maybe that same caring that you have, but in a desire to do paperwork and get fulfilled by doing paperwork. And so
Hmm.
look for those people that you can surround yourself with that complement you, Don't make the mistake I made early on in my career, which was tried to hire people that could do things that I thought were easy to do because I thought
Mm-hmm.
they were easy. So it'd be great to hire people to do those, and I'd do the hard stuff. No, do the stuff that you're really good at, and hire the people to do the things you're not good at. Huge, huge lesson.
Yeah, one other quick point I want to make is I said that if you're in a work situation and you don't want to work with someone with ADHD, then you should leave. If you're in a married situation, you need to make it work because I'm
Mm.
going to guess that you truly love each other, or at least at one point you felt you really truly loved each other and you've made a commitment to that person. And I will tell you, you can still have a wonderful marriage. It may not look exactly like you thought it was going to look. And some of your, at least as from a woman's perspective, some of your romantic notions aren't going to necessarily play out the way that you want. But that's okay too. You can still have a wonderful, fulfilling, beautiful, intimate relationship if one of you's ADHD and the other one's not. It can be a great thing.
Yeah, marriage is not a storybook Disney romance. It's not how it works. So
Mm-mm.
I think that's a great reminder. And again, just embrace it. So yeah, embrace if you have it, your partner has it, your coworker, embrace who they are and try to make them the best they can be. Well, everybody, we want to really
Absolutely.
thank you for joining us on this episode. We appreciate you listening to us talk about ADHD and that. And again, just want to encourage you, if you work with somebody like that, get to know what it means so that you can help them be all they can be. And if you have it, embrace it so that not only can you be all that you can be, but you can surround yourself with people and allow them to lean into their circle of genius as well. With that, make it a great day, everybody.
Bye bye.